This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so Thursday night is Shavuot. Tell me about Shavuot.
Shavuot is when the Jewish people received the Torah.
What does that good? What does it mean? Receive the Torah.
They they it wasn't receiving the Torah for the first time.
It was the beginning of the Ten Commandments.
It was the Ten Commandments. The Torah as we know it, Zot HaTorah Asher Samud. That Torah. When did we get that Torah?
That was that.
Meaning what?
It takes place for the 40 years, if I'm not mistaken.
During the 40 years that we were in the Midbar, Moshe was writing down, dictate either, according to one opinion of the Gemara, peace until after Matan Torah, after the Sinai, right? Let's get it straight. Moshe went up, right? And, right, Moshe ascended. We heard the Ten Commandments. Moshe then ascended. We heard the Ten Commandments. Moshe ascended Mount Sinai to come down 40 days later with the tablets. Okay? Of course, when he came down, what did he encounter? The golden calf. What did Moshe do? Broke the tablets. What date is that in our Jewish calendar? Nu. 17th of Tammuz. The 17th of Tammuz, a fast day. Right? What was the miscalculation based upon?
They thought that they didn't count. They counted the day. They didn't start with the night.
Good. They counted the day that Moshe ascended as day one. But a Jewish day is getting better all the time. We go from darkness to light, from night to day. So that day was not day one. That was day zero. So according to their calculation, when it was day 40, it was actually day 39. They went into a panic that Moshe wasn't there, and they, with Aaron, built a golden calf. So when we talk about the Torah, so then Moshe, another 40 days, shuttle diplomacy, ascended the Mount Sinai again the second time to stay up there on the beginning of the month of Elul, Rosh Chodesh Elul, came down 40 days later with the second Luchot. The second Luchot were a message of forgiveness, and that, of course, was on the day of Yom Kippur. Okay. So when we talk about receiving the Torah, when we're talking about hearing the Ten Commandments, that was Mount Sinai. That was Shavuot. Talk about receiving the Ten Commandments, the Luchot, the tablets, right? That was take one on the 17th of Tammuz, take two on Yom Kippur. But none of that is the Torah. The Torah as we have it. Where, when, what did that come from? That was God dictating to Moshe. Was it, according to one opinion, dictated in its entirety at the end of Moshe's life, at the end of the 40 years? That's one opinion in the Gemara and the Talmud. Another opinion is, no, Moshe wrote after he came down after the second tablets. He wrote the Torah until that point, and then continued piecemeal during the 40 years until completing it at the end of the 40 years. But Shavuot, we call it Zman Matan Toratenu, the time of the giving of the Torah, meaning that was the revelation of the Torah, and that is when we became obligated, right, in all of these mitzvot of the Torah. Okay. What should we remember to do Thursday afternoon, and why?
Sheriff,
To have to
Good.
fall asleep.
Eruv
Study.
Tavshilin. What does Eruv Tavshilin mean? Eruv is like to mix. Tavshilin are our baked cooked goods. What are we mixing our baked cooked goods? Why, before this holiday, do we want to deal and make this Eruv Tavshilin? And it's found in the Sidurim, I believe on page 600 in the Art Scroll 654, and it tells you exactly what to do. But what are we doing? Why is it necessary to have Eruv Tavshilin? So you can cook on Yom Tov, not more than that. You can always cook on Yom Tov. You can't light a flame. You can't extinguish a flame. You can only pass flames. You can always cook on Yom Tov.
Prepare on Shabbat.
To prepare on Yom Tov for Shabbat, because Yom Tov does not prepare for a weekday. Yom Tov does not prepare for another Yom Tov. And that is why, let's say, we can't start to do any preparations. Let's say you have a regular 2-day Yom Tov in the middle of the week. You can't start to do any preparations for the second day until the first day is completely over, until the stars are out on the first day. Yom Tov does not prepare for weekday. Yom Tov does not prepare for Yom Tov. Yom Tov does not even prepare for Shabbos, for Shabbat. So then we got a problem, because Yom Tov this time for Shavuot is Thursday night, Friday, and then Friday night, Saturdays is Shabbos and Yom Tov. So how do we do our preparations for Yom Tov? For Shabbos, we might need to put up some cholent. We might need to cook some food for Friday night. We certainly will need to set the table, right? There are things that we need to do. So why do we do it? How are we allowed to do it? Once we started our preparations from before Yom Tov, we can continue then on Yom Tov. Not on the first day. On the first day. No, sorry. That was incorrect, because the first day is the only day to do it. Yeah. If it would have been a Thursday, Friday Yom Tov, we could only prepare from Friday to Shabbos, not from Thursday. But Yom Tov is Friday, Shabbos. So therefore, we're allowed to prepare on Friday for Shabbat. Now, of course, we could only do preparations that we're allowed to do on Yom Tov, that we'd be allowed to do on Yom Tov for Yom Tov itself. Doesn't mean we could now start igniting flames, extinguishing flames, because that would be a desecration of Yom Tov. Here, the whole issue is the hachana, the preparation, that we're not supposed to prepare from Yom Tov for another day, even for a Shabbat day. But if we started beforehand, then we can continue. So how do we start beforehand, right? Traditionally, what do we do?
An existing flame.
Well, that's something else, Esther. That is in terms of Yom Tov itself. But in terms of the Eruv Tavshilin, so we take a cooked good and we take a baked good, right? So traditionally we could take a matzah and a hard-boiled egg, or a roll or a pita and a hard-boiled egg, and we make a blessing on it, right? Not a blessing to eat the bread or the egg, the blessing of the Eruv. And we say that with this preparation, we will allow to do preparations from Yom Tov to Shabbat. Let me get a sitter quickly, and we'll go right. Scroll, let's see if I'm right. 654, yes. We make a blessing. The Eruv foods are held while the following blessing declaration are recited. Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. You've sanctified us with the mitzvot and commanded us al mitzvat Eruv, on the mitzvah of Eruv. And then we say in Aramaic, make sure you say it in English also, so you know what you're saying. Through this Eruv, we will be permitted to bake, cook, insulate, kindle flame, right? Not ignite, kindle flame. We'll come to that soon. and do anything necessary on the festival for the sake of Shabbat, right? And I say for ourselves and all the Jews who live in this city to cover people who might have forgotten. Okay. Now, Esther mentions something important when it comes to Yom Tov. Okay. And that is, like we said before, we cannot ignite or extinguish a flame. So before Yom Tov on Thursday late afternoon, we light candles. That's easy. We're lighting candles before Yom Tov begins. However, for Friday night, ladies, how do we do the candles?
Transfer a flame.
From an
Transfer
existing.
of what?
From an existing flame, like
An existing flame.
kerosene.
So, existing flame. If you've got a pilot on your ovens, on your stovetops, then you're good to go. Most do not have pilots these days. So one would buy a yard site candle, one of those 24-hour candles. You could buy what's called a yard site candle. What is the yard site candle, friends?
It's for to commemorate. If you light it for commemorate the death.
Right, commemorate the anniversary of a death. Yard site is Yiddish for year. Site is time, the time of year when a person passed away on their Hebrew anniversary of passing. So we light a candle that burns for 24 hours. If you don't have access, I think Wholesome Choice, a lot of these stores will have such candles, right? Target will also have, right? Even not yard site candles. You can also buy a candle, right? You don't want a tea lamp. A tea light will last 2 hours, but you want to get yourself, right? They all sell these nice candles, right? Scented, right? There's no chiyuv, there's no obligation to buy a yard site candle with Hebrew, right? That's not the issue over here. You want to have an existing flame, okay? We had a couple of close calls, and I had to go to the boiler, and there's a flame there. I was able to access that and get a flame from there, right? The boiler went last month. We replaced it. I think the newer boilers don't work like that anymore. There's no easy access, or there's no real access to the pilot, right? So you want to have an existing flame as we go in. Good. What are the customs that we have for Shavuot and why?
To stay up, to stay up until daybreak and
Good.
learn Torah.
Right? So one custom is to stay up the entire night, Thursday night. We will be up the entire night Thursday night. We're starting our learning about 10 o'clock and we'll go till 5 a.m. And right, and the time goes fast. Before you know it, right? It's amazing what cheesecake can do to you. We'll get to that soon, right? But the time goes fast, right? And the way we do it here is we have lots of different people presenting throughout the night, and it makes it, right? It keeps things moving. We chose 48 questions of why do we, all these different things, and different people signed out to present, and that's how we work through the night. Why are we staying up the whole night learning?
Because we went to sleep.
So according to the Medrash, God needed to wake us up to receive the Torah on that morning of Matan Torah. So as a tikkun, as a way to correct, to rectify, to set the record straight, we stay up the whole night so no one needs to wake us up. We stay up the whole night. Here at Shul, we'll have a minyan at 5 a.m. We'll have a second minyan regular time at 9 o'clock. Okay, so how many meals does a person need to have on Yom Tov? Two, a nighttime and a daytime meal. Whereas on Shabbat we have shalosh seudot, 3 meals. On Yom Tov we have the 2 meals. What are the customary foods to eat on Shavuot? Dairy, cheesecake. Good. Why?
Because that's what
Okay, so Victor mentioned the idea of milk and honey. We'll see where that's going to come in. Gabriella, what did you want to say?
because Bnei Israel didn't have the Torah yet, so to keep kashrus, they didn't eat meat.
Okay. So another approach is that once we, with the Aseret HaDibrot, now all of a sudden we need to keep the laws of the Torah. The only problem is all of our vessels are not kosher. They have to go through a kosherizing process, right? And when it comes to meat, you have to start. Now all of a sudden you have to slaughter it a certain way. You got to remove the blood. There's certain hindquarters that need to be removed. It's very, very complicated. We were not yet quite so proficient. So therefore, what do we do instead? Went for cheesecake, right? So we instead, dairy was an easy way to go. That's one approach. That's right. Another approach actually is along the lines of what Victor had said, and that's very, very interesting. He mentioned Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash, the land flowing with milk and honey. Okay, so what are the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach? What are the 7 Noahide mitzvot?
Not to eat from the limb of a living animal.
Okay, one of them is not to eat Aver Menachai, limb from a living animal. What are the other 6?
Theft, don't steal.
Don't murder, don't steal, idolatry, sexual immorality. Sorry? No? Court system. That was your place. You know that, right? And lastly, not to curse out God. Those are the 7. So now, how about milk? Is milk considered aver min hachai? Is milk considered to be part of a living animal, a limb of a living animal? We know it's not, but they weren't quite so sure. But once we have the land of Israel described as flowing with milk and honey, so first of all, what is the honey that we're talking about over there? That's date honey, right? So if we are praising the land of Israel as flowing with milk and honey, then it must be that milk is allowed. Right? We're not going to say it's flowing with pork rinds and honey. That would not be a great praise to the land of Israel if it's stuff that we're not allowed to eat. Right? So some say that's the reason for the dairy. I think the most classic reason for the dairy is that on Shavuot, there was a very unique offering that was brought in the temple. And that was called Shtei Halechem. There were 2 loaves of bread. Okay? So on Pesach, we commemorate the special Pesach offerings. How do we commemorate the special Passover offerings on Pesach? What's on our Seder plate? The shank bone and the egg, the broiled egg. That represents those two offerings, which was the Korban Pesach and the Chagiga, the 2 special Pesach offerings. So we also want to give a nod to these 2 loaves of bread. Now, what they would do, which we typically don't do, is they would start the meal with dairy, and then they would transition to meat. In order to do that, you have to have 2 separate loaves of bread. So the custom is not necessarily cheesecake, right? The custom is dairy, right? Once you have to eat dairy, no reason not to go for some good cheesecake, right? But that's not actually what the custom, is based upon. The custom is to have some dairy, okay? And yeah, now the Friday night meal will typically be, as a usual Friday night meal, right? It's just on that first day that we have this custom, this approach of having the dairy, okay? Anything else on Shavuot?
Sometimes you decorate your
Nice.
synagogue or your home with plants and flowers.
Good. Why do we decorate with plants, flowers?
To symbolic of Matan Torah.
How is it symbolic of Matan Torah?
Our
They were
Sinai.
They were down there at the bottom. There was plants and
Good,
flowers growing.
good. Har Sinai was sprouting with all of these beautiful, beautiful things on it, right? Because as we always say, the physical is a reflection of what's going on in the spiritual. So if all of this spiritual beauty and guidance was coming down from that mountain, it only makes sense that that would also manifest itself in a manner of beauty here with things growing, and it represents growth and all of that, which is so important.
One more thing, I have a little note here too. In some communities, Ruth is read.
Good. The Megillah of Ruth, Megillat Ruth, is read. What are the 5 Megillot that we have, and when are they read? Esther on Purim. Thank you, Esther. So Esther has Esther and the courts so far. Yes. Esther on Purim. Good. That's one. Lamentations. Eicha is read when? When is Eicha read? Lamentations. On Tisha B'Av. On Tisha B'Av, which is the date of the destruction of both the first and second temple. Ruth, we said, the Megillah of Ruth is read on Shavuot. We also have Pesach and Sukkot. What do we have on those days?
Shir HaShirim is Passover, I think.
Song of Songs. Good. And Tara, what were you saying?
Oh, Shir HaShirim on Passover.
Good. Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs on Passover, because that is in the parable of a love song. And we're left with Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, right, is read on Sukkot, right? For everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season. That's where they get it from. That's from Ecclesiastes.
They don't know that song.
Huh? Only we know. Okay. So what is the story of the Megillah of Ruth?
Well, she was a convert. Ruth's journey was a personal sacrifice for forsaking her former life and identity to join the people of Israel.
Good, right? Ruth was married to one of the sons of Naomi. Naomi and her husband and her 2 sons and their 2 daughters left the land of Israel during a famine. They were very wealthy and they left for somewhat selfish reasons, and calamity struck, and that her husband died and her 2 sons died. She's returning back now impoverished with her 2 daughters-in-law. One of them, right, she tells them, don't come back. I got nothing here for you, right? Go back to your nations, go back to your people and make your own life. One of them did, and she became the mother of Goliath. Talk about an epic battle, right? And Ruth, right, said, right, where you go, I will go. Where you sleep, I will sleep. Where you lie, I will lie, right? And that's how we learn out many of the laws, parameters of those who are converting from Ruth. And she's impoverished, and then there is a relative, right, named Boaz, and Boaz ends up marrying her, right, even though there was a great disparity in age, right? And out from Boaz and Ruth comes Yishai, father of David HaMelech. Jesse, Yishai, father of David HaMelech, King David. Why do we read it on Shavuot? Okay, so one thing is it's the barley harvest time. Okay, what else do we have?
David HaMelech also passed away on Shavuot.
David HaMelech, King David, passed away on Shavuot. Come on the Jewish Journeys class. I expect you guys to tell me that we read about a person who is converting to Judaism at the time that we all,
Converted.
so to speak, converted to Judaism, at the time that we all became Jews, right? We need to remember our own beginnings and therefore make sure that we welcome others who want to join a little bit further downstream than when it all began, right? So this is all about her acceptance. Yes, Cheryl.
I think King David also was born on Shavuot.
Was he born? I'm not sure if he was born on Shavuot. I think he passed away on Shavuot. So I'm
Yes,
not sure.
you're
Of the
correct.
same,
Yeah, also born. Okay.
Yes.
I wasn't.
and
Thank you for
also,
teaching me that.
don't we read the book of Job on Yom Kippur?
I'm sorry?
Jonah and the whale, Job.
Yes, yes, but that's not one of the Megillot. The Megillot are from Ketuvim, from scripture. Yonah is one of Trei Asar. Yonah is part of Navi, and that's the Haftorah that we read, right? We read from Navi every Shabbos and Yom Tov, right? And that's called the Haftorah. And that Haftorah of Yom Kippur is Yonah. Okay? Yeah.
Rabbi,
Yes.
is there any significance to Yibum with Boaz and just kind of I don't know, any kind of application?
Yes. Yes. There is, right? What Boaz did in marrying Ruth was a form of Yibum. Yibum is translated as levirate marriage. Not that it really helps explain anything, right? It's kind of like the phylacteries I like to talk about, right? But what Yibum is as follows: there's a din of the Torah that if a husband dies, leaving a wife, and the husband had no offspring, so then the wife would marry the brother of the late husband, and the children, at least the children, will be considered to be the spiritual offspring of the deceased brother. And that way, even though that brother had left no continuity on this earth, this ultimate chesed is that we give them this opportunity, we give this person a child, so to speak. If it's inappropriate in any way in terms of ages, in terms of anything, or if don't want, so then there is this link that exists between them, and that is severed through a process called chalitza, right? Chalitza is a whole process. We'll discuss this on Shavuot night. Well, right? So Yibum is done through the full mitzvah of Yibum is done through a brother. Okay, Boaz was not a brother, right? And if it's a close, even though normally a sister-in-law is not, right? If a brother dies with children, after having had children, then a brother of his is not allowed to marry his wife. That would be considered an incest, an erva relationship. But this is a situation where, in the absence of children, it becomes the mitzvah of Yibum. Okay? The concept of Yibum will extend even beyond those, whoever the closest relative would be. Nowadays, we don't do Yibum, and the reason being that the Gemara says that if a person is doing the Yibum for anything but the mitzvah of Yibum, then it's as if one is entering into that realm of a forbidden of the brother's wife, which is forbidden. And in our world, right, for you can only have one wife, right? Not that I'm promoting having more, but where we only have one wife, right? And we would only want there to be a marriage if they get along, if they genuinely like each other, right? Right? So the whole nature of relationships has, I would say, progressed, right? Therefore, nowadays we don't do the yibum. But good. But Boaz, meaning that in a case where Boaz, though, was a more distant relative, he was the closest of the more distant relatives, right? And therefore, his marriage to Ruth was a yibum of sorts. Gabriel, are you asking if that relates to why we read Rus on Shavuot?
I'm just wondering because there's so many aspects of Shavuos that have spiritual layers of meaning, but if that particular aspect has any deeper meaning for us to
I would
it can
imagine it does, but I
I just meant by tradition if there's
yeah.
anything in the Mefarshim.
Maybe because God essentially took Israel as his wife. Was she married to someone else before then? I don't know.
I don't know.
But he,
Interesting.
was like a pupa.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. 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 I don't know.
Thank
I
you.
don't know. Okay. Anything else on Shavuot, guys?
Rabbi, I have a question or a comment
Yes.
regarding the reason for the prophet Samuel writing the Megillah Ruth. Was it to give a legitimacy to David if it ever came up that he was not a true inheritor of the kingdom of the dynasty of? I mean, did it have anything to do with, because being a Moabite, I was just wondering about that, if the book was written to really make King David very legitimate.
That's very interesting. Very interesting thought, Leticia. I'm not sure, right? As King David is the one. Shmuel Hanavi, Samuel the prophet, is the one who anointed King David. Okay,
Right.
he had to do it somewhat in a hidden fashion, lest Shaul would find out. Shaul would not be too happy, as he was not too happy, right? Um, interesting, right? Actually, that is an important thing to go over for our in a Jewish journeys class, right? There was much controversy over King David's over King David and his lineage. What was the issue? He came from Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite. Okay. Now there are certain nations that there are limitations on how they can enter the Kahal, meaning Labriut. Not to say that they can't convert, but that there would be limitations on who they could marry after conversion. Okay? Ammon and Moab are two nations where it says, Lo yavo Ammoni Moavi bekahal. An Ammonite or a Moabite cannot enter the Kahal, is not allowed to marry regularly. Okay? So, seemingly, now when it says an Amaleki, a member of the nation of Amalek, that applies equally to males and females. Therefore, the issue was, does that apply equally, the restriction of Ammon and Moab, does that also apply equally to males and females? By Mitzri and Edomi, two other nations, there it's only the first three generations cannot enter Kahal. But a person converts and marries, let's say, another convert, and their children then marry again another convert, their third generation can marry whoever they would want to marry. And there too, we don't differentiate between male and female. And therefore there were those who said that by Ammon and Moab also, where we have not a 3-generation exclusion, but we have a full exclusion, it should apply also to male and female. And that would mean Ruth was not allowed to have married Boaz. And therefore David's whole lineage is disqualified. However, the ruling is Ammoni velo Ammonit, Moavi velo Moavit. It was the males and not the females. How is that discerned? Because the Torah gives the reason. Why were they excluded?
Why was it?
Why were Ammon and Moab excluded? When we were going out into, right, because when we were leaving Egypt, they would not, right, they showed very, very coarse cruelty. When we were desperate for certain things, they would not give it to us. Right? We wanted to pass through their land, it came out, right? They would not give it to us. And therefore we say, who would have been the ones to bring this out? It was the men and not the women. Right? And therefore the men are excluded, the women are not excluded. Now, as this relates to Jewish journey, so are there any restrictions upon conversion for who people who have converted can marry?
You can't marry a Kohen.
Okay. A girl who converts cannot marry a Kohen. Okay. But besides that, why aren't we concerned that people who have converted might be from these nations where there are these restrictions?
Considered Jewish by every standard.
Right, but why is that? Meaning, yes, they're also considered Jewish by all standards, but they have marriage restrictions. So why are we concerned that a person who's converting might be from Mitzri or Edom, these different nations which have restrictions on who they can marry upon conversion?
Maybe because we don't have a Masorah of who's from those nations?
Okay, granted, we don't know. So misafek, based on doubt, why don't we have these restrictions? If we don't know, why aren't we playing it safe, so to speak? So there's a concept of rove. Rove means following the majority. How many nations are there? Not United Nations, but right? There are 70 nations. Biblically speaking, there are 70 different nations, of which 5 have some restrictions in place. 65 do not have restrictions in place. And therefore, we go batar rov. We follow the majority. And if anyone converting, being like Gabriela said, we have no idea which strain of these ancient 70 nations one comes from. So the assumption is a person comes from the majority, one of the 65, as opposed to one of the 5. And therefore, there are no restrictions that go in place once a person converts, besides what you mentioned, that a girl would not be marrying a Kohen.
Rabbi, I have a question. So this wouldn't be like a Safek Daraisa Lechumra, like, because if you don't know who these nations are, to be on the safe side, you shouldn't like
Okay.
even.
So Gabrielle is asking, there's a general rule that we have, Safek Da'oraita, when there is a doubt about a Torah law, we have to take on strictly, stringently. So over here, why don't we apply that and take on stringently? Because there's also a Torah law that you follow the majority. And therefore, the Torah tells us in such a case, we don't view it as a suffix. You're allowed to follow the majority, right? Classically, if you have 10 places that sell kosher meat and one that sells non-kosher meat, you find a package of kosher meat, right, outside, then you go after the majority. And the assumption is that it's kosher meat, right? So a din Torah is that we follow the rove, we follow the majority, and therefore that's the din Torah that applies over here. And we don't view it as a suffix. Rather, it's something that is as a doubt. It's viewed as
Got it.
something that the Torah rules on these situations.
Mhm.
And the ruling is mutar, that it is allowed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, guys, good. Okay, next week I mentioned I will not be here, but we will resume, please God, on June, I think 6th. Yes, and we will resume at 6:40 is when we will have, because davening then is 7:40. Okay, so we'll start then 6:40 on Tuesday, June 6th. Okay, wishing everybody a meaningful and uplifting Shavuot holiday.
Thank you.
Okay.
See you.
Yeah, Shavuot. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good night.
Hey, thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Is it's not a restriction on convert.